Okay, I've just turned on the recorder, and this is the regularly scheduled lecture for ITSE 2309, offered at, my name is Stephen Smith, and this is at the lab at Collin College. So it is Friday, September 14th. And with no further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we have done, up until now, we have created tables using the create table SQL command, and we have inserted data into those tables. And we practiced with that. We have seen creating two related tables using foreign keys, and we have discussed a primary key, what a primary key is. All of that stuff is covered in the module and in the textbook in the reading assignment that is given. Okay, so today we're backing up a little bit, and we're going to, I believe it is what, chapter, I believe I'm in chapter 3, and we talk about introducing SQL and database. SQL is different, and I say SQL is simply different from C programming in that C programming, you write a series of commands, and through these commands, it executes them one at a time, using if then else logic, using looping, whatever, and it arrives at some kind of output for you, or it solves some kind of a problem through a series of steps. We call those imperative programming languages or iterative languages, whichever. They're usually imperative, meaning I'm giving a command. So it's a series of commands. Do this, then do this, then do this. And SQL is different in that SQL is what we call a declarative language. And in the declaration, we simply declare what kind of an answer we want, and then the runtime support system takes over from there, executes our SQL query, interprets our SQL query, optimizes it, and essentially programs itself to get the answer. So SQL is truly an artificial intelligence language. So SQL, we just state the desired output and the system chooses the best path. It is usually very, very good. There are things we can do to help it out, and I'll be pointing these out as we go. Database is different. Typically, database does not set nicely with other applications. Database doesn't like having anything else running with it, although you can. We're not doing work with it. So I'm talking about the old joke that goes, how much memory, disk space, and processor time does the database you require? The answer, of course, is all of it. And it's generally true. Most of the time, a database is the only thing running on the box. And for this reason, I suggested that when you're on your box at home, that you set the database engine to start manually. Now here, it's all that's running here. This is a database class, so database has the run of the place. But on your machine at home, when you're not using the database, you probably want to turn it off. Turn off the service, the database service. For the same reason you turn off your car when you park it in the driveway at night. Database is a sophisticated piece of software, manipulate massive quantities of data on the disk. A disk table, a database table, is considered to be too big to fit into memory. One of these guys can easily be gigabytes. Now, the ones that we make, the ones that we're going to be using aren't anywhere near that big. They're little bitty 100-row tables or so, and we don't need to worry about it. But a database is designed to do input-output from the disk. It is not designed to manipulate memory. Most of the time it's too big. Therefore, a database does not keep an undo capability. When you do it, it happens. So you have to be very careful with database. Now, with that said, on our database that we have here that we're using for the examples for this class, if you trash it, Well, you can always just run the creation script again, and 5 seconds later, it'll be as good as new. But in general, a database requires extreme caution because if one missed semicolon, and you can lose everything. Slowest operation is always disk access. The slowest part of computing is getting stuff off the disk. Processor speeds have increased by factors of in the millions, maybe billions, since the early processors 4 decades ago. For example, in 1970 or so, 1980, processor speeds were just plodding along at a paltry 4 or 5 kilohertz. Now we're up in the gigahertz. Soon we'll be to the terahertz. So processor speeds are approaching the speed of light. A disk might be 4 or 5 times faster than it was in 1980. It's evolved some, but the basic idea doesn't change. Okay? So if you think of computers and how they've changed, and I've heard it a bunch of metaphors for using a car as a computer. If the cars had evolved the way computers had, they'd be able to take you to the moon and back in 3 seconds and wouldn't be worth parking. You just throw them away. Maybe. But you would still have to go down the road, and the road still gets clogged, and the road still would have traffic lights on it. And you'd still have people driving like idiots that would have wrecks. And so you wouldn't get there any faster, really, probably. And that's kind of like the idea of the processor versus the disk. Database is probably the greatest digital asset your company has. We call it the crown jewel of an organization's digital assets. That if somebody's hacking into your system, that's what they want. That's pay dirt, is to get that database. It deserves a high level of protection. You keep it well back behind the firewall. And that's the idea of why to log in as the system administrator. By default, you have to log in with Windows authentication. That says, I'm going to make you be sitting at this computer. This computer I can lock up. But if I'm allowing remote access to it, like as we do with a server, I don't want somebody to be able to log in as the administrator remotely. If I have to have that, I can set that up. But usually by default, the system administrator must log in with Windows authentication. Securing a database server is worthy of a dedicated class. Probably, that would probably be in the networking class, where you'd talk more about that. I'm going to move on. Next. Am I still? Yep, I'm still. My icon is still bouncing. I have a little icon up there that tells me I'm recording in this. Okay, from now on, our discussion will center on the AP database that we created back in Module 3. So there was a file that we had called create_AP, .SQL. Run that, and it creates the database. So we don't have to write a whole bunch of SQL. That's about 800 lines of SQL, by the way. So if you want to look at it, by the end of this class, by the end of a couple more classes, you should be able to read that file and make some sense out of it. Okay, so from now on, our scripts are going to say use AP_DB. Your database, you created 2 databases. You created the APDB, and you created another one that you gave whatever name to. Mine is named Scratch_DB. That's where we can create anything we want to create. Anything that's in there, if you feel like dropping it, drop it. The AP database, accounts payable, is representing a working database. as if we had working data. It has lots of relations, and we can go look at it, and we will go look at it, and we will become familiar with it. So from now on, we'll begin with use APDB. In the simplest form, the select statement is thought of as select what field or fields, separated by commas, field names, from which table, or later will become tables plural. Okay, so we can put the tables together following that foreign key relationship usually. Questions? Okay. Notice that all SQL statements end with a semicolon. While SQL Server is lax about requiring that semicolon, most implementations are very fussy about this, and I say, therefore, so is your instructor, i.e. me. If you forget the semicolon, you're going to get first couple of times you'll get a message from me, hey, semicolon, semicolon. Then I'll start talking you a point or something. So I'm fussy about it. For example, it ends in a semicolon. If I forgot that semicolon, our system wouldn't have any problem with it. Your teacher will. Here is a one that we can try. Let's see. I need to always get this one in there, so I'm going to copy this, go over to my new query, use this guy, and then I will copy this. Drop it. I hear somebody talking. Is that I've got the headset on. Is there a question? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and typically what I do with the online people, I'll stop every so often and ask if there's any questions from the people online, and then I'll turn on the speakers and all and give you a chance to talk. So I'm going to mute for now. Okay, so now I'm ready to execute this. By the way, I can execute if I select some of this, just a piece of this, I can execute just that piece. I have to be sure I've executed this use DB, and it says, okay, that's successful. Or I can just, if I don't have anything selected, I can just execute the whole thing. The common mistake is to have a piece of it selected like that. At that piece, so it's going to try to execute ORN. If I do that, it's going to say ORN. I don't know what that is. Okay. So the name of the game is either select what you want to execute or don't select anything. So if I say execute this, I regret that this doesn't get any bigger, any larger, but I can see that I have 122 rows returned. I can scroll through it. So what am I seeing? Over there I have a table. The table's name is vendors. I can go over to my graphical user interface. This class is not about the graphical user interface, but if I were to go over here, drop down databases, I have AP_DB. If I looked at the tables, I will see all of the tables that are there. And I can see a lot of other stuff besides that. For example, I can look at the data that are in the tables from the graphical user interface. We will be using it from time to time just to reinforce what we learn in SQL. And so the table that we're talking about now is vendors. If I drop it down, I can look at the columns of it. So one of the columns is called vendor name, and it is of type varchar. We learned about varchar, variable length character. And these are the data that we returned from vendors. So vendor name, vendor city, Show me all of them from vendors. The standard example of the select statement. A select statement does not change data. A select statement does not change the data in the table. Therefore, 90% of what you do in database, maybe, I don't know, 85%, a lot of it anyway, is writing select statements, querying the database, getting information out of it. And from the database, typically it sends it up to be presented to the user. I don't let people come and connect directly to my database and get information out of it. Most of the time, this information, what the output of an SQL query is most of the time being sent up to a web server. Through the firewall to the web server. The great unwashed internet land connects to the web server, authenticates there, and then I talk to the database through that web server. Web servers are going to get knocked over 3 times a day. They're going to get hacked. They just are, because they have to face the internet. They have to take connections. But my SQL server only takes very trusted connections from computers that are inside my firewall. Okay, therefore I don't care a whole lot about how an SQL output is formatted. It's going to get formatted later. I'll talk a little bit about formatting it later. This is fine. We just have a vendor name and a vendor city and a list of the information. Go back to 122 rows returned. If you get an error or something, you have a problem with your database creation. Well, we can fix that. Columns names are turf. Column names never contain spaces. Even though SQL Server will let you put spaces in your column names and table names for that matter. Never, 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 never. Talk a little bit about that later, a little bit more about that. On the other hand, if you want to show output with spaces, that's fine. You can rename it. There's really no reason to, except that we're going to do it just because it's covered in the textbook. So I'm going to show you how to change the name of the output and to put spaces in it if your web server wants it that way. Personally, I would just hand it to them the way it came out of the database and let the web server put the spaces in there. But this is how we do it. This is the same query. Select vendor name as. Notice in this case it says vendor name with a $sign at the end of it, just for giggles. Could have put anything in there. And notice that it is between the square brackets. It's delimited. You can also use double quotes in many database products, but the default, the standard is the square brackets. Therefore, many times when a computer program, like Access, for example, is generating the SQL, it will put square brackets on everything. This is why, because it will work with square brackets even if you don't have spaces. I discourage using square brackets unless there is some reason to. Unless I ask you to give it some strange alias. So the alias for this one, I'm going to see this one as vendor space name $, vendor city as vendor space city. If I execute this query, now notice that after I have said use AP, it's going to stay until I change it. So now I can just select this one that I want to execute and say do it. Now notice I got the same 122 rows, except this one is named vendor space name $, and this one is named vendor city. That's not very important to me. That really doesn't have much to do with SQL or database, because I really don't care what the fields are named. Somebody later can worry about that. I want to get the correct information. I'm usually perfectly happy keeping the names the same. I will probably ask you on a test to change a name, just so you can, just show you do it. By the way, on the tests, 2 tests, you will have access to your book and notes. So the name of the game is not to memorize, but to try to get the idea of what we're doing and know where to find it and how to look it up. That's the deal with programming in general. You don't try to memorize a syntax. As a programmer, you're going to use so many different programming languages, you won't remember one from day one to the next. You'll use one for a week, become an expert in it, and you'll never touch it for another year. Question?
For the open book on the test, can we only use a hard copy, or?
I'll talk more about that. You'll be able to use your notes and your books and stuff like that, though. Okay, let me go back to this guy. Go ahead.
Under select winner name, it's automatically selecting everything.
Right, I haven't told you. It's automatic. No, the select, it selects only two columns, because that's what I told it. I didn't specify. So the question is, does it select everything? No, it selects only the rows that I give it. Now, excuse me, got a frog in my throat today. Had I said select asterisk, the wildcard, I don't do that a lot, but just that generally gives me messy output, but I can do that. If I put an asterisk in there, select splat from vendors, it means select all of the fields. We will usually, when I program, I don't use that very much, because most of the time there's always one in there that I don't want or something. Well, it gets kind of a lengthy output. What will happen is, if you're in a command line, this will word wrap and the output, so you'll get lines that wrap around, and it looks really messy. SQL output is a little bit like having the engine to, SQL is like the engine to your car. Just an engine alone, sitting in my garage on a stand that I can start it and run it, isn't very useful for anything, right? You have to have a car wrapped around it. But we're studying the engine now. So this is this is a data pump. That's what we're studying. Renaming an output column isn't very useful in your instructor's not so humble opinion, because it's usually processed further. So when you do something odd with a new name, it goes in brackets. If you just want to rename it as something different, you can rename it. You say as foo, F-O-O. Well, if there's no spaces or special characters in it, you don't need the brackets. I very seldom use them because I very seldom have spaces in anything. Where clause, select from where. These are typically called SFW queries or select queries. You'll see it used in the literature as an SFW query. This is what they're talking about. Select from where. It always comes in that order. It's always written in that order. Select what fields. In my example case, vendor name, vendor city. From what table? Vendors. If I get the table wrong or misspell the table, I'm going to get an error. Where vendor state is equal to CA. Everything in, well, not everything. Most of the things in, almost everything in SQL is written with single quotes. If you see me put a double quote, say, Dr. Smith, you're writing in C or Java or some other language. SQL uses single quotes. SQL is not case sensitive. SQL doesn't care about uppercase, lowercase. Now, your instructor does. Notice how when I write SQL code, when it is a reserved word, meaning in your text editor that you probably use for SQL, you can use any text editor you want. It will highlight it in blue or bold or something when it's a reserved word. Those words I put in all uppercase. The identifiers that I make up, for example, the field names, I had to write those in my create statement. I usually use a mixture of uppercase, lowercase. You can use the underscore character. In your programming experience, what is a properly formed identifier? How do you make an identifier other places besides here? Begins with a letter, uppercase or lowercase, followed by 0 or more letters, digits, yes, or one more, underscore. Okay. There should never be spaces in there. Now, in SQL, somebody in their wisdom once decided, well, you need to put spaces in there, so that's why they put the square brackets. If you just don't use them, if you follow that, starts with a letter, followed by letters, digits, or underscore, you'll be fine. Now, with that in mind, you can use the underscore. C programmers tend to like the underscore between logical words. The Java programmers tend to like what they call the camel case. This is an example of vendor name here. Let me roll this font up. Vendor name is an example of camel case. It starts with a lowercase, and then when it's got another word in there, I capitulate it. I don't have a particular preference on that. If you want to use underscore characters, you may. But since its name is VENDORNAME, that's what it's named in the table, you can't change that. All right? So you have to use some, if you put an underscore in there, it's not going to work. Notice here that I received 75 rows because where vendor state is equal to California. Out of 122 vendors, 75 of them are in California. Guess where our publisher lives? You can probably guess the city if you were to look at the city. Okay, we retrieved fewer rows, was the idea. Only the rows that met this condition. The field or fields in the where clause did not have to be in the query's output, although they usually are. Well, no, that's not true. They don't have to be in the query's output. So I did not select that vendor state does not appear up here. Vendor state does have to be in the table, but it doesn't have to be in the output of the query. Fair enough? I'm going to pause at this time for questions from the online participants. I see you muted yourself. That's fine. I unmuted you to talk if you want to. Okay, that's fine. Anita, do you have any questions?
I don't have a specific question, but generally, like the table name you said, we can use the column as an underscore too, like a vendor underscore name, but the name should be the same that's used in the table.
The question from the internet people is, I said you could use an underscore when you created the tables, but when you write your code, as we're writing code, it has to be the name that was used when the table was created. So you don't get to change the name of the field or the table. When you are creating a table, you have you can use underscore or camel case as you please.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay.
And another question, one more. So whatever the specific need, we put into the brackets, or?
No, you only use the brackets. Well, okay. The brackets are optional if there are no spaces. You should never use spaces, so you'd never need to use those square brackets. But you will find them used many times if a computer generates the SQL. It will many times put square brackets on it, even though there are no spaces, because it just says, I'm going to put square brackets on everything. If you go to Access SQL, you'll find that everything's in square brackets.
Okay.
Okay. We won't use them. I discourage them.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because I don't want to ever use spaces. You have to have square brackets only if you have spaces. And we're not going to have spaces, right?
Yeah, spaces in between the queries, or?
No. Spaces in the identifier.
Okay. Okay.
Spaces, for example, first name, FIRSTNAME with no space does not need square brackets. FIRST space NAME has to have square brackets. And I won't be happy with that one.
Okay.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've introduced the equal to operator, which is just an equal sign. It doesn't, we don't use the, sometimes we use the equal to for assignment, but it will always have the word set, S-E-T, in front of it. So this, if you just have the equal sign like that, that is equal to. We have 6 of them: equal to, greater than, less than. The other, everything's all the same, except the preferred way to write not equal to in SQL is with what I call the diamond operator, which might be read as less than or greater than. But the exclamation point equal to, the C version of it, also works, where this one is recommended when you're writing not equal to. Okay. And an or may also be used in the where clause. So I can say where the vendor state is equal to California, CA, and vendor city equals, quote, San Diego, because there's a San Diego, Texas also. So if I want it to be, if I want to make sure I get California, I would have to say the state is CA and vendor city is equal to the quote San Diego. Now you can have spaces in that San Diego. That's data. That's a datum. That's a piece of data that's not an identifier. So get the difference between an identifier. Here is an identifier. Here is an identifier. This is a datum. Datum, singular for data. This can have spaces in it all day. Fine. If you put trailing spaces in it, it might chop them off. It's free to do that.
Whenever you're writing what you just said with the and or statements, so what you're telling it to do, you're telling it to select, go get the data for the vendors table that is vendor city,
Okay.
vendor state, California.
Let me do an example.
But only where California, or go get, I'm trying to figure out how to word my question. Go get the data from the vendors table where San Diego is city of California. That's kind of what that is.
Right. Well, that's logically, yes. Let me type it here. Vendor name, vendor city, from vendors where vendor. Notice this is an identifier. This will never have a space. Is equal to, that's data. That is a datum. That can have spaces in it just fine. I see. I have fat fingered something here. Okay, select vendor name, vendor city from vendors where vendor state is equal to California, CA, and vendor city equals San Diego. The fact that this has a space in it is just the name of the city has a space in it. That's not a problem. Okay. People will sometimes mistake that and say, no, you can't have any spaces in the data. You have spaces in the data all day, and ampersands and @ signs and hashtags and everything else. Another point being, blank lines here are okay. Blank lines are fine. It's between the statements. Usually I will give you a copy of these notes that I'm writing. I will usually attach them to an announcement, and I'll usually save my file and send it out to you. Okay, avoid empty lines inside of a select query. Many of the platforms will throw an error if they find an empty line. SQL Server will not, but avoid empty lines inside. This, by the way, line 16 is not empty. Okay. And I will cover, before we get to lab, I will cover how to turn on your line numbers. Does everybody know how to turn on the line numbers? Okay, groovy. Back to the next. Question.
You didn't have not on the
and or and not. Yeah. There it's there. I didn't say that. I just all I gave you at this point was and or, but it has another one, not. So not, usually when you write not, if I wanted to get everything except vendor city, where vendor city is anything except San Diego, I could add a not to it. And I should put this in parentheses when I say not. It'll do strange things. The not logic, think of not as a negative sign. Think of and as multiplication or as addition. So that's the order of operations. So the not is going to get applied first, then it will apply the and if you have any ors, so when you're mixing and or, the ands will come first. Always in programming, that's true.
So like there, it'd be better to use a diamond, right, for vendor city and San Diego.
You could use the diamond inequality, yes. So you can generally, not is not as important because if I just flip the one, so if it's greater than, I can, not greater than would be less than or equal to. And you could always, there's usually several ways to write it. But yes, not is another one of the logical operators. Right. This would be the same thing as, this is a comment. The comments can be a dash dash is the comment from here to the end of the line. The SQL Server also accepts the C comments. So open a multi-line comment. Write as much stuff as you want, as many lines as you want. End with its backwards version. Okay. I usually use these guys most of the time. So vendor city. Does not equal center. And if you don't want to do that one, that also works. That's also not equal to. This was the first one, and then they added the exclamation equal later. It got added in about 1991. So virtually everything today uses both of them. A database table is unordered. A database table is unordered. There is no order to a database table. That said, sometimes I tell you lies. And a database table has to be ordered. It's on the disk. Therefore, something comes before something else. And that's true. It is ordered. And the database is ordered by the primary key. But we don't know that. We pretend that it isn't. We pretend that there is no order to a database table. If you just select from it, you'll get it in the order of the primary key, probably, unless something else perturbs that. Now, that said, I can add an order to my select from where query. And for example, here is one. Select vendor city, default terms ID. From vendors, I have a where clause in there that has an and in it. So an and, they both have to be true, or is true when either of them are true. And I have an order by vendor city. Now vendor city, if I were to run this, I would get them, vendor city everything would be ordered, it would be alphabetically ordered. By the vendor city. Let's see if it is. Execute. I wish there was some quick way to expand this guy. So default terms ID, I see all these guys. Look at all of them that say Fresno. Guess where our publisher lives? Fresno, California. Kind of a grungy town, but they're from California. There's lots of places here, Gardenia and Los Angeles, lots of them from Los Angeles, and the little lady from Pasadena. Very few from Texas. I think I added a few from Texas I think I added San Diego, Texas just to make it. Notice we're sorted this by alphabetically by an ascending order. So A's come first, then B's, then C's, and so on. And if I want it sorted the other way, I can say DESC, sort it descending. Now the keyword ASC is found sometimes. The ASC specifies ascending, but since all SQL always will give it to you sorted ascending, you will almost never see a programmer use the word ASC for ascending, because that's the way it's going to sort it if I don't say anything. So there's no point in adding typing burden to myself. Okay. So this sorts orders by vendor city. Field does not have to be in the select clause to be the subject of a sort. Just has to be in the table. In this case, I'm sorting by zip code. And sometimes there's a reason to sort by zip code. If you sort by zip code, you get a better rate when you take your bundles down to the post office. Yes?
So when you order by vendor city, when the vendor city is the same, how does it work within there? Is that arbitrary or?
Vendor, it's you don't know. Within, okay, so the question is, when the vendor city is equal, How does it sort relative equals as far as my sort field goes? The answer is you just don't know. But I'm going to get to that in a minute. You can specify other fields. So you can say sort by vendor city, comma, vendor state, comma, vendor name, however you want to. It will sort by vendor city first. Then within that, it will sort by the state. So you would see San Diego, California, followed by San Diego, Texas. Okay. If you said sort by vendor state, comma, vendor city, you would see all of California together and then all of Texas together, which is about what you're expecting. Here it is. You may order by more than one field, sort by vendor city. After you sort by city, order by zip code. Example, sorted first by city, then by zip code. Questions here? I'm pausing for questions.
Can we put in?
I'm unmuting if you can. Question came from what?
Can we put and or in that order by?
Yeah, you know, because the order by goes in order of that you name them. So the question was, I'll remute you guys in a minute. Order by vendor city is always first. After it sorts by city, it comes along, and within the city, it sorts by vendor zip code. So it's not, there's no and or there. You could use and or. And or applies to the where line. There's the only place we'll use it now. So and or, if I said vendor state is California or the default terms ID is 2, I would get Texas if it had a default terms ID of 2. Okay. Okay, internet people, I have my earphones on.
The order by, will it be ordered by vendor city and zip code?
Okay, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you because you have a poor microphone.
Yeah, okay.
Try backing off of it a little bit. We might try it during lab, but yeah, I think you've got a cell phone. I can make you out, yeah.
Yeah, I was concerned about the,
Okay.
when you say order by vendor city and vendor zip code.
I'm sorry, I'm not, why don't you, you can send me your question in a Canvas message and I'll be happy to address it. Okay.
Okay.
That's a field in the table. Mm-hmm. All of these guys are fields in the table. So I can't, if he's here, he's a field in the table, unless it's preceded by the word as. In that case, I'm making it up. But so default terms ID as foo, then let's see what we got here. Null values, my favorite. They're saying in database, nothing gives us lots of trouble. It's true. Those nothings can really be a pain in our rear ends. We don't like nulls. Therefore, I constrain most of my fields when I'm writing a field. I don't let you put null values into any field unless I don't have any other way around it. Okay. Maybe I just gonna have to. If I have to, I have to. I do not like null values in a table. I will go to great lengths not to. What I will always try to do is come up with some value. For example, default terms ID is probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is what it's set up as. Okay, well, what if I had a value that I'm going to give a default terms ID when they don't have one. This is what I'm going to give them. For example, I would give them -1 maybe. Well, that's an invalid terms ID, but if you see the -1, that means they don't have one yet. It's better than a null. A homeroom, for example, a student's homeroom. We don't have those in college, but let's say we did. And so homeroom H133, homeroom. What would I do if you didn't have a homeroom assigned yet? I might give you the dean's office as your homeroom. Okay, and so when I see that as your homeroom, I know, wait a minute, I haven't set that one yet. So I would go deal with that, but it's better than having nothing in that field. Don't like fields that have nothing in them. Sometimes I'm stuck. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes I have no way, I have no value that I can put in there that is the value nothing. So I have to allow nulls. Check constraint from table creation. Remember the constraint, field not null, check. Field name is not null. A field is null when it has no value, and that's undesirable. The relational operators equal to, greater than, less than make no sense applied to null. The equal to means is the same thing as. Null is not a thing. I have a little table over here. We are not going to do if then else logic in this class. If then else logic comes from C. Actually, it is the topic in the next class, ITSE 2347. One of the questions I'm going to ask on a test is kind of like one of those, it's a free question. It says, if we offered ITSE 2347 advanced database programming, towards the end of the class I'll ask you, maybe on the final, would you sign up for it? It doesn't have a right or wrong answer. So be thinking about that. It is offered this semester. It's typically a once-a-year class, but I'm thinking about pushing it up to offering it each semester. I'm not the one that does that, so I have to have some data to back it up. But over in SQL always has a programming language wrapped around it. Remember what I was telling you about the car, about the engine of a car that isn't much good without a car? Well, there's always a programming language wrapped around SQL. And I'm using that programming language here. So if null is equal to null, print true, else print false. If null is not equal to null, print true, else print false. And I get all 6 of them greater. That should be what? Less than or equal to, shouldn't it? Greater than, less than or equal to, less than, greater than or equal to. So I've gotten them all 6 of them. And so when I run it, I haven't, this is laying around from last time, but when I execute this, boom, it prints false on all of them. Wait a minute, one of those guys has to be true, don't you think? And the fact of the matter is, no. What it means is that the relational operators of greater than, less than, equal to make no sense when they're applied to null. My example is my car older than, newer than, the same age as your car if I don't have a car? Can you answer that? Does it make sense to ask that question? The answer is no, it doesn't. But if you do ask that question anyway, the answer is false. Are you over 21, under 21, exactly 21 if I don't have a birth date for you? It's just null. Answer is false to all 3. Even though by trichotomy, one of them has to be true. Nope. If one of them is null, you cannot compare it. Okay, that's an important point that's going to become important to our lives. When I'm testing for null, an order by clause that contains null value, I've got to do something with them. So if I say order by vendor city, but what if I've got null values in vendor city? First thing, I never want to allow null values in the vendor city. I have to know their address. So I put them in there, and if I have null values, they will be treated as the least value. So if you're ordering ascending, they will come first, descending, they will come last. What I would probably do if I had a vendor city and I didn't have anything, I would probably put Erewhon in there, nowhere spelled backwards. There's probably a city named that somewhere. Have to put them someplace. So when I order by a null value, they have to go someplace. Therefore, they just arbitrarily, here's what it's going to be. We're going to put them at the beginning of the sort order. They can put them any place. They can't just fall in there randomly. So we got to put them one place or the other, either at the beginning or the end. They chose the beginning. So select vendor phone from vendors, order by vendor phone. If they don't have a vendor phone, they're going to come at the beginning.
The whole the constraints field underscore not underscore null. Now,
This is the name of the constraint.
yeah, okay.
All right.
Naming it within that. It's not named up here somewhere.
No, it's I'm just giving that as an example. I believe that was table creation, and I believe if you went and looked at that's just an example of something I might name it. I typically give my constraints long-winded names because I'll almost never type them. And if I violate that constraint, I will see the name in the error message. So I want somebody that gives me lots of information. That name needs to convey information to me, because when I violate it, even in the most cryptic environment, even on a command line, and I'll get some really cryptic number back for the I get to go search that and figure it out, but I will see that constraint name. So that's going to tell me which one I hit. So that's why I do named constraints. Yes?
Are there like operators on constraints? Like move or add constraints to other tables?
Are there operators on the constraints, meaning
Like some operator that takes constraint name as
some function that takes the constraint name as a parameter, meaning?
yeah.
I can enable a constraint. I can alter a table and enable or disable a constraint. So I can say, okay, don't worry about that one for now. That's all I know that I can do with one. We'll talk more about that. Okay, so this vendor phone from vendors, ordered by vendor phone. So if I tried to do this, select vendor phone from vendors where vendor phone is equal to null. What will I see? I will see nothing. Because if it's got a value, well, it's not equal to null. It's not null. But if it is null, remember, null equal to null doesn't give me anything. It's false. So this is going to be false for all of them. Anytime you put equal to null in there, it's over here also if you want to see it. Anytime you stick that equal to null, you get nothing. Just about time for a break. Now, to test for null, we're going to say select vendor name from vendors where vendor phone is null or is not null. There's your not, is not null. You could also say not, and then I would open parentheses and say is null. No, excuse me. I'd put this in parentheses and say not in front of it. Not vendor name is null, which doesn't make a whole lot of, sounds like it's a lot of trouble. So if you're going to check for vendor name,
Instead of putting not, why wouldn't you say
is.
just the city you are requiring? It doesn't make sense.
Well, that's a different question. You see, if I want to find the vendors with null. I don't know whether I have any or not. So if I want to find vendors that I don't have a phone number for them, which is quite possible, I have quite a few. I have 25 of them that don't have phone numbers. Better than that, I would say that I would probably default that field to 999-999-9999 or any darn thing, maybe a hash or something. I can put that in that field. It's not a valid phone number. Something that I look at, I say, man, that's not a valid phone number. That's just so I can have something specific because I don't like leaving it null. Yeah. The other thing is having a null in there doesn't really save me any storage space because I still have to allocate the 9 characters for the phone number. So if I say it's char 9, I've allocated 9 characters, but I just don't have anything in there. It's nulls, we just don't like them. We like everything having a value. So there might be some position I'd be in where, you know, if I had a char 1 and what is your favorite ASCII character? Well, it might be anything. So I just don't have anything that's nothing. As sure as I say that the null character, ASCII code 0 is the null is null, somebody's going to have that as their favorite. You know, it's like, can I come up with a name that isn't a name? Well, as sure as I do, it's going to be somebody's name. Anyway, we run into problems. Maximum and minimum values in a field. We're going to, in the next chapter, we're going to run into this problem. Okay, let's see. It is 11:03. I'm going to pause the recording now. Okay, okay, we're now recording again. So we've dealt with the idea of null. The way we compare null is we say is null, is not null. We cannot compare directly null. Database, well, languages in general, databases don't, but languages in general handle nulls differently, every one of them. For example, in C, the C programming language, it makes perfect sense to say is equal to null, because in the C programming language, if it's null, it's 0. Null is also false in the C, so you can say if null, well, that would always be false. If a variable were null and you said if it's usually a memory address, then C, a memory address is null when it's 0. That's guaranteed to be an error if you try to go there. And so I've got a memory address and some variable called, let's call it P. And I say if P, that means if it's not null, then do something. C is a little strange. In general, how many of you have programmed in C? A few? Java? C or Java? C plus. Whenever I say C, since about 1990, you mean C++. I wouldn't surprise me if one of these days you said, when you said C sharp, C, you mean C sharp. C sharp is actually a different language from C++. Well, that's good language. All C programs are C++ programs. Excuse me, back that up. All C++ programs are valid C programs, but it is not so that all C programs are valid C sharp programs. Okay, so they're two different things. Like sheep and goats. Let's see what else we got here. Okay.
Does SQL use C under the hood, or
No, you can interface with SQL from C. From almost any language, you can write C SQL and execute it from C. What you have to do is you put your SQL query into a C string. So your C string says select something from something, where something. So you build it into the string. Then you send that string to the server and it executes it. And then you get your records back one at a time, or you can set it up that way. So Python is also a very good one. Visual Basic interfaces very well with SQL Server because they're both Microsoft products. But there's always a built-in language that's designed to work with the SQL of that platform. So this built-in language that we have with SQL Server is called TSQL or Transact SQL, and it's its own language. And so I don't have to worry about putting my SQL into a string and sending it to the server. It just executes it. I come along and I have a SQL statement in the middle of my program. It just executes it. Right, if then else, I can loop and do all kinds of stuff there. From Oracle database, it's called PL/SQL. Anybody ever programmed in a language called Pascal? Yeah. PL/SQL is Pascal. So for those of us who started programming a few years ago, we're mature. We like Pascal because it probably was our first language. Okay, let's go on with this instead of nattering here. Distinct, the keyword distinct. Duplicate values are eliminated by using the distinct keyword. So select distinct vendor state from vendors is going to give me just a list of the states where I have at least one vendor. For example, California, CA will appear as just CA. It won't appear 50 times. If I said select vendor state from vendors, I'm going to see CA, 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 and so on. If I put that distinct keyword in there, it's going to eliminate duplicates. Okay. Each state abbreviation appears only once. Notice that the distinct keyword has replaced unique. You will still see, some people will say select unique vendor state. Unique should not be used any longer. We use the word distinct. Goodness, that was a short.
Is that only used with one column then?
It can be used with others, so you can say distinct, open parentheses, and if you use distinct at the beginning of it, then it will suppress duplicates in the output of anything. So if I say select distinct vendor city, vendor state, I might have 10 San Diego, Californias and 1 San Diego, Texas. All I'm going to see is San Diego, CA, San Diego, TX. Okay. So distinct, I believe, I don't think you have to do anything. You don't have to put that in parentheses. I think if you did, it'd be okay. But it applies to everything that comes after the distinct, usually to the whole record. In other words, I want to suppress duplicates. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Derived fields. In other words, calculated fields, if you like. For example, in the invoice table, we have invoice total, how much, payment total, how much was paid, credit total, how much credit did we have. You might want to take a look at this. It's going to be popping up over and over again through the class. So the amount due or the payment due, whatever, would be invoice total minus the quantity, payment plus credit. Okay. Where minus and plus multiply work just like they do anyplace else. So I can write this query as select invoice number. Invoice number is just invoice number, then the comma, followed by invoice total plus payment total minus the quantity payment total plus credit total. I could write also have said invoice total minus payment total minus credit total would have done the same thing. Okay, there's usually more than one ways. Then I need to rename it. So whenever I have a calculation like this in a select, I should rename it. Otherwise, it will not have a name. It'll be an anonymous column. Okay. We don't like these because when they're usually going up to a server someplace, and I need all of those columns to have names so that when the web server receive, and web servers are set up to receive stuff from databases, but they want everything to be named. They don't care if it's got a cryptic name. It just has to have a name so that I can tell the web server what to expect. If it doesn't have a name, it really puts a hitch into its get along. So this says select, we're going to name this amount due from invoices. So this is a good one to run. Let me run it. Okay. Now, sometimes when I scroll off, I usually, what I like to do, and if I were to scroll off here, what I would do is I would come down and tab in under it, okay? I'm a little bit fussy with format on SQL. And you say, what do you mean fussy with format? I want you to fuss over your format a little bit. Don't just give me everything slammed up against the left margin. In other words, notice how I have taken some effort to make this readable. I don't like it when stuff with a normal size font, I've got a fairly large font here, but I don't like it to scroll off the page. So when it does that with a normal size font, I will use my enter character to bring it back over. SQL is indifferent to line feeds. It's indifferent to tabs. It's indifferent to spaces. Whether you put spaces between stuff or not, spaces will separate things, but things are usually separated by commas. So it's the comma that separates that, not the line feed. It's that comma. These spaces in here are indifferent. Whether you have 10 or 1, it doesn't matter. This space between the as and the amount due separates the two identifiers, or the two. Those are called tokens. So if I were to execute this, notice that I've got the invoice number and the amount due. Notice that most of them are 0. There's a couple there. I'm probably only interested in the amount due. And we'll come back to that. I think that's coming up in the module. So invoice number. This one is going to be used fairly frequently. So make a note of this, how you calculate the amount due. It comes up over and over and over again in the exercises. Right, yeah. This from the module, right here. Users probably only interested in those invoice numbers for which they must cut a check. Therefore, we would like to write this. And it makes sense that you would like to write that. And it makes sense to me that it should work. And you go, well, why doesn't it work? And there is an answer to why it doesn't work. And it might work on some database products. However, in SQL Server, most others, it won't work. So you have copy and paste is your friend. You have to copy this guy, copy him, and he goes down in the where line, where paste is greater than 0. Now, this gets a little strange, I say, because you can use this identifier, amount due, you can use him in the order by, so you can order by amount due, but you cannot have amount due in the where line. Okay, now this needs a little explanation. Okay, and I'm going to tell you why that's so. Because order by amount due. This is perfectly legal. This is fine. If I were to run this, it would run, and so we would only get where the for that amount due was greater than 0. But I had to write this in the where line. Okay, here's why. Reason for this behavior is explained in the sequence of evaluation. So the first thing that gets evaluated is the from. The from. What tables do we use? The second thing that gets evaluated is the where line. Notice that the select line, where it got its alias, has not been evaluated yet. You can alias a table name, by the way, also. In that case, it's aliased first. It can be used anywhere in the query. Now, finally, we get around, now the alias comes into existence. It comes into existence on the third pass through it. And then after we do that, so first, what tables do we need? It goes out and collects the tables. The second one is where. What conditions do we want to put on the rows? So then it goes out and collects the rows it wants. Finally, almost the last thing that happens is it figures out what fields of those tables it's going to display. And then the very last thing that happens is we put the order on it. And that's why. Because the alias happens on the third step. The where is the second step, and the order by happens after the select. Now, does it make sense? Okay. If a term is aliased in the select, it may appear later, and there'll be some other stuff coming in here later. Now, database products might differ in their behavior. If you do not create an alias for the derived field, page 93. So if I do not have this as on there, commented out, if I just select that value, when I run this, I will get, by the way, you'll get points taken off if you have a unnamed field. What's the name of this column? No column name. Empty. Okay, bad. Remember, we don't like nulls. We don't like things that are undefined. We want everything. I want my whole world to, everything is defined. I don't like asking questions. I don't like not knowing something. Some things I don't care about. For example, this one doesn't have any order on it. Then I don't care about the order. If I want order, I have to put the order on it. Lots of times I'll order by just anyway. If I don't order by, I don't know what order I'm going to get them in. I just don't know. Might get them in any order. Yes.
Let's say if we define this invoice total minus payment total plus credit total in the beginning, will it work on a later inquiry?
The answer to the question is if we were to somehow define
Like say we say the formula as amount due.
right, yeah. The question is, can we save that formula for the amount due someplace at the beginning of the program? Now, it would certainly make sense to do that. And the answer is yes, you can, but not in this class, because we do not have anything like a variable in this class. We don't, it would be a function. So those of you who have written C would write that as a function. And in my language that wraps around this, I can certainly write it as a function and then just call it when I want to. Absolutely. We're not going to do it in this class, though.
It just makes sense because you mentioned this will be used again and again.
Agreed, and it's a perfectly good thing to say, well, I'd like to do that. We're not going to do it here because I would have to write a compiled function. Okay, big, it's just like a function. Name it IT, invoice total, or excuse me, AD, amount due, and then it just give it 3 parameters.
Well, like you can do it without filing, right? Because like in C, you can have aliases where you just substitute text in there.
Right, and I assume that you could have that's called a macro, where it just substitutes the text in there. It's usually done with that pound define thing. We don't have anything like that in SQL. The reason we don't have it is SQL is not a compiled language. It's an interpreted language. And in between the script, in between the statements, so you think of each select from where statement as an independent program. So it runs this program, then it runs that program, and the two don't communicate yet. Now we're going to see later in your study of SQL, you can get them to where they do communicate, where they do set variables. In this particular class, we're not going to have variables unless we want to do some of them. In that case, we can. So you can create a variable. But in general, with respect to a first class in SQL, you don't create variables because that throws in a whole different bucket of worms. So if you're interested in creating variables, that comes in ITSC 2347, Advanced Database Programming, where we create variables. We do if, then, else. We do looping. We read through a table one row at a time. We create things called triggers that when you update a field, this code executes and checks it to make sure that everything's right. And we can do a lot of things with it. Right now, we're just looking at just the engine. So I'm going to try to stay in pure SQL here, meaning anything that we write here. It's not always possible, but anything that we write for this class should apply to any database product, any place, Access, SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle. We should just be able to drop it into any of them and it run. I won't always be able to do that, but we'll try. Okay, covered that. Okay, always if you have a derived table, if you have a derived field, you have a calculation, you have to give it a field name. For example, it has this as this guy, as amount due is not optional. It doesn't have to be as amount due. If you said as X, okay, I don't care if you alias it as X. I'd rather see you alias it as amount due, but X would work. I wouldn't take off for it. Let's put it that way. You have to give it a name. I typically don't use X. Okay. Okay. Chapter 3. Objective of Canvas is to augment the textbook. I make this promise to you. I will never, ever, ever sit here and read you the textbook. You've got the textbook, okay? I had a graduate class once, as a doctoral level graduate class, where we sat in class for 4 hours once a week and read orally the textbook to each other. I was about to strangle that professor for more reasons than that. The string expressions, page 94, 95. Okay, strings, what's that? That's my name, Joe space blow, okay, is a string expression. Anything that's inside of single quotes is a string expression. They're referenced in one of the chapter's assignments, but they You can read them. There's nothing weird there. Arithmetic expressions, add, subtract, multiply, and divide, work the way you expect add, subtract, and multiply and divide to work, like they do in algebra class. Math, just arithmetic. They're covered well in the text, exactly like they do in every other programming language. Multiplication comes before addition. All right. Using functions, page 98 and 99, I'm going to say, I say it is the topic of chapter 9, meaning that I'm not going to ask you directly about that. So page 98 and 99, you can just glance at. Covered the distinct keyword, page 100, 101. Okay, top clause. I don't have a whole lot of use for the top clause. Let me show you an example of it. As amount due from invoices, order by amount due, or order by amount due descending. So notice I didn't put a where clause in here. Don't have to. So the only two I have to have are select and from. If I don't have a where clause, I just don't have one. It's going to select them all. I'm going to get all the zeros. But when I execute this, notice how I got my ones that weren't zero sorted first. So I said sort descending. Okay, if I change this, top 5. So select the top 5 invoice numbers. So I'm going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to see these guys right there. So 503 should be the last one I see when I execute this. And that's what it does. So show me the top 3. I can say top 3, top 10. I can also say top 10%. I put a percent after it and it'll work. Now, remember what our basic, what I called the first normal form, they had 3 rules. And the 3 rules were, what were they? No duplicates, right? No duplicate rows. The other rule was data contain exactly 1 value. In other words, I should never have first name, last name in a field because those are 2 values. So I always break out things that are 2 values. I'll never have 3 phone numbers in the same field, even though I could. But I always going to treat that as 1 value. So your name is either your name or you're going to treat it as first name, last name. In that case, it needs to be in 2 different fields. It's just a violation to do anything different. It means you're a skunk if you do it. And then the last one is data are accessed by content only. Well, top violates that. Because instead of saying what the content of it is, I'm saying order them and give me the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a little bit of a violation of that. Now, I didn't say that we would never, ever violate those 3 fundamental rules. We violate stuff all the time. But my goal is not to. Therefore, I don't particularly like top. Therefore, I don't teach top a whole lot. But that's what top does. Give me the top 10. So it has to have an order by on it. If you don't do an order by, I don't know whether it makes any sense to do top. I don't do it very often, right? What I would normally do is I just take it all and then pass it up to the web server, let the web server take what it wants. My job is giving you all the data that conform to a certain criteria, however many rows that is. And so you just get this table. The output, by the way, of an SQL query, select from where query, is a table. So this goes up, it's a temporary table, goes up to the web server. Now the web server can process it further. The web server can strip off the top 10, that's fine. But anyway, that's what it does. Top 5 gives me the ones that sort at the top. If I'm sorting ascending, I'll get the first 5 that it comes to. There is no bottom. You have to turn it around on the sort. So I guess you have to do an order by before top makes any sense. I don't know what would happen if I didn't execute the order by. Say again? I'd probably get the first 5 primary keys, yes. I would expect. And that's what it looks like I got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think those are the ones that if I looked at it, if I selected, I believe the invoice ID is the primary key, and I believe that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on through 122 or whatever, how many invoices I have. I believe I would find I'm getting the first 5 primary keys, but I just don't do that. That's not something we do much, but top is covered in the textbook, so I'm just going to wave my hands at it there. Top clause, page 102, 103. I say it is seldom used by SQL programmers. It's worth reading about it. Okay, so I'm going to let you do the reading in the text on some of this. And with that in mind. Okay. These quizzes are, I have to put the quizzes in there because, well, this class is certified as an online class. It has to have quizzes. So I consider them pretty much busy work. You have no time limit. You have multiple attempts. So, you know, it's nothing to get your knickers in too big of a knot over. Just do them. You say, oh, you didn't get something right. And then, okay, here's where most of it is. This is the assignment, and I always give you the assignment as a Word document also. And then this is what the Word document says in it, standard set of instructions. So this tells you how to submit. Use your favorite text editor. You can use Notepad++, whatever. And I tell you what to name it, Module 5, Assignment 1, SQL. If you submit and you say, oh, I forgot to say use AP_DB. Okay, and you go back and fix it and submit again. It overwrites it, but it doesn't actually overwrite it. I will see the last one you submitted. It will append a 1 to it. Let's say -1 to the file name. That's acceptable. If you do, or -2 or 3 or however many times you resubmit, it's okay. We fuss about things like file names, but that's what Canvas does. So we'll just let Canvas do its thing. Here are the exercises. This is what use your own name. You all of them will start off with -- a comment, and your name. So your name appears at the first line of every file. All of the queries are written into the file. Do not open a different file for each query. Please do not zip the file. These are very little files, very small files. They'll upload in about half a second, unless you have string and 2 tin cans. They don't need to be zipped. And then that just means I have to stop and unzip them. Pay attention to the required file name, except for the -1 and -2 that Canvas might append. I'm not worried about those. We're fussy about file names typically, but number each exercise in a comment and skip space between them. End each statement with a semicolon. When you finish the entire file, I should be able to say, okay, execute, and it should run the entire file like a string of firecrackers. It is acceptable to discuss algorithm, meaning that you may share an understanding. Unacceptable to copy another person's code, obviously. the exercises are similar to those found on page 123 of this textbook. However, they have been edited to reflect what I want them to show. Do the first one for you. You're not responsible for for the color. There's if you go into Word document, it has them colored. So I say select. So this is number 1. Write a select statement that will return all rows and all columns from the vendors table sorted by zip code, and there it is. That's what I'm looking for. Something like that. Okay, ending in a semicolon. So it would have 1, indicating that that was exercise 1, appears in a comment. I have the code after it. Then the next one, just skip some space and a --2. So when I grade your code, I'm just going to basically open your file in my SQL Management Studio, say execute, and look at how many rows I get returned. Sometimes I tell you how many rows I got. Don't take that literally, because many times I change the data file. I find that I need to change something about the data file, and that perturbs how many rows you get. Okay, if they're wildly different, something's wrong. But if you're off by a couple of rows, 1 or 2, 3 rows, don't worry about it. You know, if I say I got 96 rows and you get 97 or 95, you're probably right. Probably just change the data. Questions? So there are, we're going to do 8. By the way, just because it says challenge doesn't mean that you don't have to, it is counted. It's not a bonus. No, I don't have any bonuses. Hey man, you got any spare change? No, it doesn't come any spares. Yeah, I'm just saying that one's a little challenging, and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to try it. I can be lenient on it, but if you just leave it blank, it's going to cost you the same amount as leaving any other one blank. Okay, are there any questions from class? Are there any questions from the people on the internet? I have my earphones on now. Are there questions?
No. No.
Okay.
So I have a question, not for this assignment, but the previous one.
Very well. A question from the previous assignment, Anita?
Yeah, so my question is that, like, you said like the one owner can have multiple pets, but the one pet can only have one owner. So you want us to put some data in that, like any fake data, like any
Yes, you're going to make up some data. Let me take off these earphones or put them to the side anyway. The question is, one pet can a pet has exactly one owner. An owner has 0 or more pets. That's a code that I'm telling you. I'm telling you something that's important about a foreign key there. Where is the foreign key? Foreign key is in the pets table, referencing the owners table. So therefore, if I have an owner, his name is Joe Blow, and his owner ID is 3, there might be a pet in the pet table named Fang, and he's a Bengal tiger, and he has the owner ID in that field is 3. So it references the owner's table. He could also have a, I don't know, whatever other kind of pet he's got, a dog, I guess, and then that dog would, in the owner's ID field, the foreign key would reference 3. So an owner can have as many pets as he or she wants, including 0 pets. Because if an owner has 0 pets,
that's okay.
They just don't appear, they don't have a pet in the pets table that has a 3 in the owner ID field. Okay, that said, a pet has exactly one owner because it has exactly one owner ID field.
Yeah,
Fair
so just
now
like 3 or 4 computations would be enough, like
yes.
the 4 or 5 people name with the
Right. You're just demonstrating that. I believe I give you some things, and I say in the assignment 4, I give you some data to insert. So you're probably in assignment 3.
yeah, I am.
Okay. Don't worry about the data in assignment 3. You're going to get that in module 4. But let me ask you this: exactly one owner. A pet has exactly one owner. How many owners can a pet have? 1.
Right.
Can a pet have 0 owners?
No.
No. What would it mean? What would the data look like if a pet had no owner? He would have a null value in the foreign key.
Right.
Therefore, in this case, to have exactly one owner, the foreign key needs to have a not null constraint.
Okay.
Remember, a foreign key can be null.
Yes.
But I tell you, no, it can't. So that means you have to add a constraint to it, because a foreign key, just because it's a foreign key, doesn't mean it can't be null. It's just if you have an owner in that field, if I have a 3 in that field, I have to have a record in the parent table with a primary key of 3. That's all that means.
Okay, so you want us to construct the relationship between the primary key?
Yes,
Between pets and the
you're going to in chapter 3. Question is, do you construct the relationship? In chapter 3, you do create the foreign key into the
pets and the owners table?
between pet. Yeah. So from pets, the foreign key in pets references the owner's table. Yes.
Okay.
It's just like the example. What I think the example was.
Actually, you
patient
asked us to be the char as a 4. So I just make an ID number because the SSN is not possible with the char 4.
You can name it. You can name it the ID number. That will be just fine.
Yeah, I just named it as ID.
That's okay. You, the designer of the table, gets to choose what names to use. Just don't have any spaces in them.
But you just want it as a character 4, right?
Yes, char 4 is fine. You have license over that. If you want to make it longer, if you want to call it SSN and make it longer, that's fine. I'm looking for the relationship here.
Okay. Okay, that's okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Question?
Oh, that was my question.
That's fine. It will automatically put spaces in.
Oh, okay.
You make it char 9,
Yeah.
it'll add spaces. That kind of thing it handles pretty well. Okay, we're about at the end of our class period for today. For this, I'm going to end the recording now. I'm going to leave the meeting in progress for a minute. If I'm going to take my headset off, and I'll come back here from time to time. If you need me to answer you, you can send me a message on Canvas, and I'll see it and put my headset back on. I'm curious what would happen if I wonder if I can. I'm going to try, sometime I'm going to try putting the headset onto the room speaker and see if I can use this microphone and the room speaker. We'll try that. I'll try that next time. Okay, I'm going to end the recording now. So I'm stopping the recording.